By the spring of 1943, the weather forecast had become a weapon of war. Not a metaphor, a literal weapon. The side that knew what the weather was going to do over the next 48 hours could position ships, route convoys, deploy submarines, and schedule aircraft patrols accordingly. The side that didn't know was flying blind. And in the North Atlantic in the middle of winter, flying blind could mean running your convoy directly into a waiting wolf pack. Germany had a problem. Weather in the North Atlantic moves from west to east. It starts over Canada and moves toward Europe, which meant the Allies always saw it first. The Americans and Canadians had weather stations up and down their coastlines. The British had Iceland, Greenland, and a network of ships. By the time a storm front reached the mid-Atlantic, Allied forecasters had been watching it for 3 days. German forecasters were guessing, and that gap in knowledge. One side, knowing what the other side couldn't, shaped the Battle of the Atlantic in ways that historians are still unpacking. This is the story of what happened when the Germans decided to fix it, and why fixing it wasn't enough. To understand what Germany was up against, you need to understand how much weather actually mattered in the Atlantic campaign. A wolfpack attack was not a simple thing. It required coordination across dozens of submarines spread across hundreds of miles of ocean. Submarines needed to surface to attack. Wolfpacks operated primarily at night on the surface, running at full speed to get ahead of a convoy and attack from multiple angles. Surface operations depended entirely on visibility conditions. A storm with 30-foot waves and winds at force 10 meant a submarine couldn't get crew onto the deck to man the deck gun, couldn't see the convoy clearly enough to track it, couldn't reliably coordinate with other submarines. Heavy weather was double-edged. It also grounded Allied aircraft, which was useful. But navigating the trade-offs required knowing what was coming. Aircraft patrols had the same dependency. A Liberator patrol out of Iceland was flying into ocean conditions that, in a North Atlantic winter, could change in 6 hours from manageable to life-threatening. Scheduling patrols that would cover the right areas at the right times depended on forecasting. Routing convoys around storms, or toward them when the storm would ground enemy aircraft and make tracking harder, required 3 days of advance warning. The Germans understood all of this. Admiral Dönitz, in his headquarters on shore, was directing wolfpacks around the Atlantic like a chess player, positioning submarines based on convoy routing, intelligence, and weather windows. His staff sent messages like favorable weather conditions expected in Sector X for the next 48 hours, alongside tactical orders. Weather was baked into every operational decision. But the forecasters in Germany were working from the wrong end. Weather systems were hitting the Western Atlantic, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, Labrador, and moving east. By the time German observers in France or Norway saw them arriving, the window for useful prediction was already closing. Allied forecasters had seen those same systems 3 days earlier when they were building off the North American coast. Dönitz didn't accept this passively. His submarines were assigned to weather reporting duty. At any given time in the campaign, submarines were diverted from their attack missions to float in fixed positions in the mid-Atlantic and transmit meteorological data, temperature, barometric pressure, wind speed, cloud cover. He hated it. He called it a pedestrian waste of combat submarines, but the intelligence requirement was real enough that he couldn't refuse. Over the course of the war, 53 U-boats drew weather reporting assignments, despite the fact that the regular radio transmissions required for the job exposed them to exactly the direction-finding technology discussed in previous videos. 5 of those boats were lost specifically to Allied interdiction while on weather duty. Imagine what weather reporting duty looked like from the crew's perspective. You had trained for offensive operations, tracking convoys, firing torpedoes, evading depth charges. You're one of the best trained sailors in the German Navy. And now you're anchored in the mid-Atlantic, transmitting meteorological readings every few hours, required to stay in position regardless of approaching threats, because the meteorological data stream needs to be continuous. Every transmission you make is a potential bearing for an Allied escort. But the mission requires transmissions. So you transmit, and you wait, and you hope that the next aircraft that appears over the horizon is heading somewhere else. 5 boats didn't have that luck. Germany also ran weather ships, surface vessels deployed into remote areas of the North Atlantic specifically to collect and transmit meteorological data. One of them, the Lauenburg, was captured by Royal Navy forces in June of 1941. The seizure was so valuable that it had to be covered up. The British staged a plausible reason for why German naval communications had changed. Because if Germany knew the Lauenburg had been taken intact, they'd realize the Allies had her codebooks. The weather ships were too vulnerable. They needed something else. On September 18, 1943, a German submarine departed Kiel with an unusual mission. Commander Peter Schrew commanding U-537, a large Type 9 sea boat with 2 unusual passengers. Meteorologist Dr. Kerr Sommermeyer and his assistant Walter Hildebrandt. In the submarine's forward hold, packed in 10 heavy canisters weighing 220 pounds each, was a device called the Wetterfunkgerät Land, number 26. A Siemens-built automatic weather station, codenamed Kurt, after the doctor who'd designed it. The plan was straightforward, though the execution was anything but. The Germans needed weather data from the western North Atlantic, specifically from the area off the Labrador coast where storm systems formed, before tracking east toward the convoy lanes. An unmanned automated station would transmit temperature, barometric pressure, wind speed, and precipitation readings every 3 hours over shortwave radio, providing data that no manned vessel could safely collect from that remote coastline without risk of Allied interception. Schrew's route took him north, through waters that turned hostile before he reached his destination. In the mid-Atlantic, U-537 ran into a storm that sent a massive breaker crashing over the boat. The hull began leaking. More seriously, the quadruple anti-aircraft cannon mounted on the deck was sheared off and lost to the sea. U-537 was now unable to dive. The hull damage made depth operations unsafe and defenseless against aircraft with no anti-aircraft armament. Schrew continued. He had his orders. On October 22, 1943, U-537 arrived at Martin Bay in northern Labrador, at a remote stretch of coastline, far enough north that Schrew calculated it was unlikely to be visited by anyone. Inuit hunters occasionally worked the area, but not in late October. Within an hour of dropping anchor, a scouting party confirmed a suitable site 400 yards inland on a 170-foot hill. Then the work began. For the next 28 hours, through a northern Labrador night that dropped well below freezing, crew members worked in relay teams, hauling the 220-pound battery canisters into rubber rafts, rowing them ashore through Labrador surf, and manhandling them up the hill. Armed lookouts stood on the high ground above the site. The installation crew erected the tripod mast, connected the instruments, calibrated the sensors, and confirmed the station was transmitting. Sommermeyer added one final touch before they left. He labeled the equipment canisters with the logo of a fictional organization, Canadian Meteor Service. He scattered empty American cigarette packets around the site. If anyone found it, the goal was to make it look like a Canadian installation, not a German one. It was a careful deception, applied to a site so remote that the deception was almost certainly unnecessary. But the German thoroughness demanded it regardless. U-537 departed. The weather station transmitted for a few days, then its signal degraded, and within 3 weeks it stopped entirely. Sommermeyer's team concluded that the battery failures had ended the transmission prematurely. The data received was useful for a short time, then the station went silent. What happened next is one of the quieter oddities of the war. Nobody found weather station Kurt. The crew of U-537 knew it was there, Sommermeier knew it was there. A handful of German naval intelligence officers knew. But the war ended, and the station's existence stayed buried in classified archives that were largely inaccessible for decades afterward. In 1977, a geomorphologist named Peter Johnson was conducting unrelated research near Martin Bay when he stumbled across a rusted metal canister on a hillside. He thought it was a Canadian installation and flagged it accordingly. Around the same time, a retired Siemens engineer named Franz Sellinger was writing a company history, found photographs of a weather station and a U-boat in Dr. Sommermeier's papers, and eventually matched them to the Labrador coastline. The two discoveries converged in the early 1980s. The Canadian government sent a team to retrieve the station. Weather Station Kurt is now at the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa on permanent display. It is the only armed German military installation ever erected on North American soil. U-537, the boat that placed it, had been transferred to the Far East and sunk with all hands by the American submarine Flounder in the Dutch East Indies in November 1944, 11 months after the Labrador landing. Dr. Sommermeier had left the boat before its final transfer and survived the war. If the Weather Station Kurt story represents Germany's desperate, ingenious, ultimately futile attempt to close the meteorological gap, the convoy battles of March 1943 represent what could happen when weather conditions temporarily broke in Germany's favour. In mid-March, Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park lost access to the German naval Enigma cipher for 9 critical days. The cause was a small operational change in Germany, a new format for weather report messages that removed the predictable crib words the codebreakers needed to break the daily cipher settings. The German Naval Command made the change for unrelated weather security reasons and probably didn't fully understand what else they'd accomplished. They'd blinded British convoy routing intelligence at exactly the moment when Dönitz had his largest concentration of submarines in the North Atlantic. The result was the biggest convoy battle of the entire war. 3 wolf packs, 42 submarines in total, intercepted convoys HX-229 and SC-122 simultaneously in the mid-Atlantic air gap, the zone beyond the reach of land-based aircraft from either side. 100 merchant ships and their escorts ran directly into the submarine lines, because the Admiralty's convoy tracking room couldn't route them around a threat it couldn't see. From March 16th to 19th, the Wolfpacks made their attacks. 22 merchant ships sank, 13 from HX-229, 9 from SC-122, a loss of 146,000 tons. More than 300 merchant seamen died. In the entire 4-day battle, 1 U-boat was lost. The Germans broadcast the news as the greatest convoy battle of all time. A subsequent Royal Navy internal report concluded starkly, the Germans never came so near to disrupting communications between the New World and the Old as in the first 20 days of March 1943. There was a period that month, the same report noted, when British planners were questioning whether convoy was even viable as a defensive system. The scale of losses had exceeded the rate at which new merchant ships could be built. Think about what 300 merchant seamen means. These were not military casualties in the conventional sense. The men who crewed Allied merchant ships were civilians, older men, young men, men who had chosen the sea as a trade before the war started and now found themselves crossing the North Atlantic with knowledge that if their ship was hit, the water temperature would kill them within minutes. The North Atlantic in March runs between 2 and 5 degrees Celsius. A man in the water without survival equipment was unlikely to survive long enough to be rescued. The convoys carried rescue ships specifically for this purpose, but rescue ships were small and slow, and in a wolfpack attack on a scattered convoy, reaching survivors while the attack continued was often impossible. The men who went into the water in March 1943 went in knowing the odds, and the weather report format, change, that Bletchley Park couldn't break, the one that had enabled all of this, was a routine administrative update, not a deliberate tactical deception. Germany changed its cipher cribs for meteorological efficiency, and the side effect was 9 days of Allied blindness at the worst possible moment. It was one of those contingencies that the history books tend to smooth over because it doesn't fit a neat narrative. Sometimes a change in weather reporting procedures shifts the balance of a battle. But here's what the German broadcast celebrating the Great Convoy Battle didn't mention. The conditions that produced it were temporary and not reproducible. Bletchley Park broke back into enigma within days. The weather change that had blinded the codebreakers became understood and its effect neutralized. Allied escort technology was improving faster than German submarine tactics could adapt, and the convoy battles of May 1943 would demonstrate exactly what happened when the temporary advantages evaporated. Convoy ONS-5 left Liverpool on April 21, 1943, 43 ships bound for Halifax in ballast. The convoy escort was led by Commander Peter Gretton aboard the destroyer Duncan, an experienced group that had worked together and trusted each other's instincts. From the moment the convoy sailed, the weather was bad. A full Atlantic gale was blowing when the convoy formed up. By April 23rd, station keeping was nearly impossible. The gale had grown severe enough that ships were struggling to hold their positions in the convoy grid. Gretton's group was fighting simultaneously to keep the convoy together and to screen its flanks against the submarines he knew were out there. The Wolfpack sent their contact reports whenever they caught sight of the convoy, which Huff Duff sets on the escorts picked up immediately. But the same sea state that made U-boat attacks dangerous also made precise depth charge attacks difficult. The destroyers were rolling hard enough that accurate sonar work was nearly impossible. Both sides were fighting the weather as much as each other. When the weather created gaps and scattered ships, it also disrupted the U-boat line waiting ahead. Germany had positioned 2 Wolfpacks, Star and Finker, 43 submarines combined, across the likely convoy route. But the storm that was making things hard for the convoy was making things equally hard for U-boats trying to intercept it. On April 24th, a flying fortress from Royal Air Force Coastal Command sighted U-710 on the surface about 10 miles ahead of the convoy. The submarine appeared to be unaware of how close the convoy was. The aircraft attacked and sank it. On April 28th, a German submarine spotted the convoy in the middle of a full Atlantic gale. But the gale conditions prevented a coordinated Wolfpack assault. The attack that should have begun that night didn't materialize. By May 1st, the U-boats had lost contact entirely, unable to track the convoy through the weather. And then, on May 4th, the weather cleared. When the storm abated, Dönitz's 43 submarines had a clear view of the convoy and its position. Contact was re-established. The Wolfpack attack began. That night and the following day, 9 merchant ships sank. Dönitz was optimistic. He sent a message to his commanders. The sound of the kettle drums must begin. Hurry, otherwise there will be nothing left of the convoy for the 40 submarines. What came next was the night of May 5th, turning into May 6th, 1943. 7 U-boats surfaced directly in the convoy's path as darkness fell, positioning for night surface attacks. The standard Wolfpack approach that had worked for 3 years. Ahead of them was the convoy, moving across the point where the warm Gulf Stream current meets the cold Labrador current off the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. The 2 currents collide at that junction and produce fog. Dense, impenetrable Atlantic fog of the kind that reduces visibility from miles to yards in the space of an hour. At 10 o'clock at night, the escort commander counted 7 U-boats on the surface. By 10:02, visibility had dropped to 1 nautical mile. By 1 in the morning, it was 100 yards. The U-boat commanders had seen fog before. Fog was an advantage. It blinded the escorts, concealed the submarines, created the confusion that allowed Wolfpack attacks to succeed. What they didn't know was that the Royal Navy had been fitting its escort ships with centimetric radar since 1942. The Type 271 set, operating on wavelengths the German Metox radar detectors couldn't hear. could see a surfaced submarine in zero visibility at distances of up to 10 miles. The escorts could see clearly through fog that blinded everything else on the surface of the ocean. In the fog that night, the U-boats moved blind. The escorts moved with precision. The result was one of the most one-sided periods of the entire Atlantic campaign, compressed into a few hours of near-total darkness and near-zero visibility. The escort destroyer Vedette made a radar contact at over 5,000 yards, nearly 3 miles, through the fog. She closed, dropped depth charges on a diving submarine. Then she turned and found a second contact 900 yards away and attacked that too. The corvette Lucistrife made radar contact at over 5,000 yards, approached, and caught U-192 in the act of diving, dropping 10 depth charges as the boat went under. The destroyer Oribe, investigating a sonar contact, drove out of the fog at full speed and physically collided with U-125. The impact was hard enough to shear the U-boat's conning tower. The corvette Snowflake then found the damaged submarine on radar, observed the crew abandoning ship by searchlight at a range of 100 yards, and watched them detonate the scuttling charges and go over the side. The sloop Pelican attacked and destroyed U-438. Canadian aircraft sank U-630. Across the night, in the fog that the U-boat commanders had expected to be their cover, 5 submarines sank. The crew of each submarine, moving blind on the surface of the ocean through fog that reduced visibility to a wall of grey, knew that something was wrong. The attacks kept coming from unexpected directions. Escorts appeared out of nowhere, already at close range, with clear bearing information that shouldn't have been possible in zero visibility. Some of the U-boat commanders correctly suspected that the Allies had a radar they couldn't detect. The METOX receivers their boats carried were designed to warn of incoming radar signals, but METOX was tuned to the wrong frequencies. Centimetric wavelengths were outside its range. The warning system that was supposed to give them time to dive was deaf to the exact radar painting them from 3 miles away. The Wolfpack Finca lost so many boats in those hours that it ceased to function as a coordinated unit. After the battle, Dönitz wrote an assessment for U-boat command records. He acknowledged the fog had worked against his forces rather than for them. He attributed the loss to the radar advantage and noted that the window of favourable weather his commanders had expected to exploit had instead become the condition that got them killed. In a particularly painful piece of irony, the fog that had blinded his submarines was itself a weather phenomenon. The predictable, recurring collision of the Gulf Stream and the Labrador Current that any forecaster with good meteorological data could have anticipated. 40 years before the war, basic oceanographic charts already showed the fog zones at the Grand Banks. Germany had known about the weather pattern. What they didn't know was that knowing the pattern and knowing how the other side would exploit it were 2 different problems. The rate of exchange had turned catastrophic. 13 merchant ships sank over the full ONS-5 battle. 6 U-boats sank. Under 2 merchant ships for each submarine lost. The Wolfpack system had been built on a model where each submarine could expect to sink 3 to 5 ships on a patrol before returning to port. An exchange rate of under 2 ships per submarine lost was one the U-boat force couldn't sustain. 3 weeks after the convoy ONS-5 battle, the same pattern repeated. Attacks on the next 3 North Atlantic convoys, HX-237, SC-129, and SC-130, produced 7 ships sunk and an equal number of U-boats lost. The last of those convoys, SC-130, in late May, crossed without losing a single ship. 3 Wolfpacks attacked. None got through. In May 1943 overall, the U-boat force lost 43 submarines. Not just from convoy battles, from everything. Aircraft patrols, convoy escorts, accidents, all causes. It represented 25% of the operational submarine force lost in a single month. It was nearly 3 times the previous worst month. Dönitz was running the numbers himself. He understood the mathematics of the U-boat campaign as well as anyone alive. He'd built the Wolfpack system and directed it from his first day in command. The numbers he was looking at in May 1943 had no positive interpretation. Germany was losing submarines faster than it could build them and train crews for them. The boats that survived were increasingly operated by crews who had lost their experienced officers and petty officers in previous sinkings. The new crews being thrown into the gap were less experienced, less confident, and less effective, and they were being sent into an environment that had become dramatically more lethal than the one their predecessors had trained for. On May 24, 1943, Admiral Dönitz ordered his Wolfpacks to withdraw from the North Atlantic convoy routes. He wrote afterward that the Allies had rendered the submarine ineffective. His staff prepared an analysis of what had gone wrong. The analysis identified Allied radar, aircraft coverage, and improved escort tactics. The role of weather, specifically the meteorological intelligence gap that had driven the whole weather station Kurt project, and the weather reporting submarine program, appeared in the margins of the analysis, rather than at its center. The meteorological intelligence gap never closed. Weather station Kurt transmitted for 3 weeks and stopped. The weather reporting submarines kept transmitting and kept being attacked. The basic structural problem, weather moving west to east, the Allies seeing it first, always, remained in place from the first day of the campaign to the last. Dönitz had tried to solve an information deficit that the geography of the North Atlantic made practically unsolvable. And in the attempt to compensate, he sent submarines on weather reporting assignments that exposed them to exactly the radio direction finding that was also killing attack submarines across the Atlantic. 43. That's how many U-boats Germany lost in May 1943. Out of roughly 240 operational submarines, almost 1 in 5 in a single month. The losses that month, combined with the April battles that preceded them, broke the Atlantic campaign as an offensive threat. The Wolfpacks never returned to the convoy lanes in the numbers that made them effective. Dr. Kurt Sommermeyer, who had ridden U-537 through a storm to reach a frozen hillside in Labrador, survived the war. He left the boat before its final transfer to the Far East. His weather station transmitted data for 3 weeks, then went silent and sat undiscovered for 34 years on its hillside above Martin Bay. The crew of U-537 weren't as fortunate. All hands went down with the boat when the American submarine Flounder caught them in the Dutch East Indies in November of 1944. The storm that Germany needed to forecast. The storm that would determine where to position 40 submarines for a convoy attack. The storm that would ground Allied aircraft and blind Allied escorts, kept moving west to east, as it always had. The Allies saw it coming. The Germans saw it arriving. In the fog that sank 5 submarines in one night at the end of convoy ONS-5, the U-boat commanders could have been forgiven for thinking the weather was finally on their side. The fog was so thick, a man couldn't see the bow of his own ship from the bridge. The escorts could see 10 miles in any direction.